I want to start by asking you, before this piece, what you've done and where your kind of inspirations come from, I mean, you're from Chicago, obviously. Are you both from Chicago?
No.
Neither of you.
Came there for school.
Where was that? At the Art Institute?
School of the Art Institute of Chicago, yeah. And that's where we met in Chicago, like...
Probably 98, 99?
98, yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so we were in a class there together in the performance department, and Lynn Hickson taught there, and...
who we should say is part of Goat Island.
Who's the director of Goat Island, and now the director of Every House Has a Door. And so we met there, we took classes, and then we learned through Lynn that Goat Island was starting these residential summer schools, and they started doing them in Chicago, but I think both of us, we were just friends at this point and had sort of decided that that was something that we wanted to do, but we wanted to wait and be able to do it somewhere that wasn't Chicago so that we didn't have to go to work afterwards and things like that. So then they did a 2-week one at the University of Bristol in the UK in 2000, and both of us decided to go do that with some other friends. And then I think somewhere during that trip, we were getting ready for our senior year of our BFA experience, and somewhere at the Goat Island Summer School we sort of decided that collaboration was something we were both really interested in, and we knew that we had a thesis show that was coming up at the end of our senior year. And so I think then on that trip we had worked on something before, but that's when we sort of formalized the idea of starting a longer commitment to each other and to a company or a group. And so that's sort of where Cuppola Bobber started there, and then our first piece that we made was our thesis show, and it was called Subterfuge. And that was the first sort of formal Cuppola Bobber piece that we made.
Where does the name come from, Cuppola Bobber?
There's a couple different, I think, things we were thinking about when we started deciding we needed a name, and I think we were looking at cabooses, like the end car of the train, and there's a kind of caboose. It's a bobber caboose, and usually there's like a cupola on top, and it's where the engineer would, has a vantage point for looking down the track to make sure the train's in alignment, and would work in his journals. So there, I think that's one of the things. And then we also liked, from that, we liked this idea of a vantage point and like to look at like a small detail in the distance, or like a bobber, like a fishing bobber, like in water. So it's kind of as a playful name, and I think we liked the sound of it. So I mean, that was the things we were talking about or the discussion we had when we were
and not only was it fun to say, but it's also not really anything, right? And it's something, I mean, everybody asks us, so what is it? And people will say it all kinds of different ways. But I think that that's part of what we were interested in, is something that we could attach to that was sort of descriptive of something, of a process that we wanted to define together. This idea of the engineer watching the train as it goes through the landscape, or being in an architectural cupola and looking at a microscopic detail in the landscape and extrapolating meaning from that. But also,
that's something that characterizes all your work, is that kind of microscopic focus on single moments or single ideas.
Yeah, precisely. I think the idea of scale is something that we're always talking about. And in our last work, The Man Who Pictured Space from His Apartment, it was sort of about, started with the image of laying on an engine hot hood of a car and looking up at the stars, and essentially what that feeling is, but that feeling is an effect of scale. And then this show is similarly focused on the experience of being at the sea, and sort of the cultural function of this, or the sea's function in culture, but also in sort of an existential contemplation. And so those are definitely plays of scale, and in shows we're often pushing those gigantic or vast landscapes. We're trying to describe them using really microscopic detail about them. So I think that that's a metaphor that was set up in the name that we, when we were deciding what we wanted to do as a group, that became descriptive of that.
So let's talk about the genesis for this show, specifically. The piece was inspired by a reading of initially by was it the Seven Rings of Saturn?
The Rings of Saturn.
The Rings of Saturn.
Yeah.
Sorry. And can you talk to us about?
Yeah, Steve
about
actually brought that.
Well, we had just started working on a new piece, and it happened around the same time we got this fellowship. We knew we were going to be spending some time in the UK because we had gotten a fellowship at Nuffield Theatre, Lancaster University, and we had a few ideas of how we wanted to start, and you know, one of them involved like taking this cross bay walk, which is across this bay, Morecambe Bay, which has this history of quicksands and people crossing the bay, and you need like a guide to cross the bay to read the sands, to sort of steer you around these things.
A lot of Chinese.
Recent, yeah.
Chinese cocklers.
Cocklers, yeah.
Died, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this, I mean, we wanted to do a walk, and one of the things we were looking at was like other, and we always look for texts that to look to for inspiration, or you know, as the research portion of during the beginning of a performance. So it seemed like the Sebald book, Rings of Saturn, is about his walk on, you know, the eastern coast of England, southeast.
Through Suffolk.
Yeah, through Suffolk. So it seemed to, you know, it's something different, but it kind of was something to look at for how we were starting to approach the beginning of the new piece. It seemed like a good place to start with, like to read and look for source material, inspiration. And during that reading, we came across a few things that inspired this piece. I think one of them was his account of the town of Dunwich, which is in Suffolk on the southeast coast of England, which is a town that over, I don't know how many hundreds of years has like slowly been sliding into the sea. Like parish churches have slid into the sea, and it's like this.
The town church.
Yeah, there's been a series of
Nine
churches.
of them.
Yeah,
Nine of them.
Yeah, that have slowly slid into the sea, and he talks about this, and that seemed to be, you know, we were talking about this like mechanical action of nature and this grinding action at the starting point, I think, and it seemed to be, you know, correspond to you know, it sort of inspired something in the piece. And in this piece we have a long sort of erosion narrative, in a sense, a section of it where we're we reference that Sebald passage, I think,
yeah,
in a roundabout way. I mean, not directly, but was inspired by that, I think.